Hey everyone, welcome to another Lightroom 4 workflow tutorial. Today I thought I'd take you through the processing of one of my latest images that I made right here in my backyard in the beautiful Hudson Valley. It's titled Highlands Dawn. This particular image compositionally for me was quite a challenge because I've been up there so many times, and so I'm always trying to find a new way of seeing the same thing, and that's one of the great challenges, but also one of the things that I think is most rewarding about landscape photography, at least when in places that you visit often, is pushing yourself to find kind of a new way of interpreting a familiar location or the same scene. Some of the specs: this was made with a Canon 1DS Mark III, 1/6 of a second at f/16, ISO 100, of course. I'm always at lowest ISO that I can on a tripod to minimize noise and just give me the best, cleanest capture. All right, so let's get into the processing. Of course, this is my final version, and this is the original capture. Okay, and one thing I want to just emphasize very quickly is that I also believe in trying to get the very best possible capture that I can before going into Lightroom and really working on an image. Starting with the best ingredients that you can in your raw file will guarantee that you're going to wind up with the best possible result. All right, so again, this is the original, and usually I start with the basic panel and work my way out on Lightroom. White balance for any image that's shot early in the morning or the evening where the light isn't pure. It's going to be a subjective adjustment because the light isn't white, and so anything that's white in the image may have some bias. Now, one thing you see right away is that in the shadows here, it's very biased towards the blue, and so I do want to try to balance that out a bit. But again, I want to make it warm, keep that warm light, which is the way I saw it, the way it felt. And so I'm going to take the white balance up to about 6,000 or so, roughly 6,100, and you can see that warms up the image, and it looks a lot closer to how I saw it, how I remembered the scene. Exposure, I'm just going to bring that up a bit to about +15, and that just opens up my shadows just a bit, which are going to get dark again once I add a contrast curve. So just bringing up the exposure a bit. I'm not blowing any highlights. You can see my histogram looks pretty good even with adjusting my exposure. My histogram is pretty good. I have room on both sides, shadows and the highlights. So again, I was able to capture all the tonalities with just one exposure, which is always great. Contrast, I'm going to leave at 0 because I usually like to adjust this afterwards with the tone curve, which I find a lot more powerful. Highlights, I'm just going to pull these down a bit to about -20, and that just helps to give my clouds up here a little more definition, and so that they're not so blown out. You can see it's very subtle. Shadows, I'm going to push up to about +30, and I'm only doing that because, again, I know when I add my tone curve adjustment, it's going to make those shadows richer, and I don't want to lose this shadow detail in here. So I'm going to push this up to about 30. I'm doing this from experience. Again, sometimes I leave this at 0 and add my tone curve first, and then you'll see what happens then. As a matter of fact, let's try that. So I'll leave this at 0. Whites, I'm going to push up to about 10. Again, I mentioned before that I had some room in my histogram, meaning I'm not clipping anything. I can hold down the Option key and adjust this, and you can see I'm really not clipping anything to about there. But I don't think that I need to go that far. I think +10 is pretty good. I don't know if I had pure white in the scene. It was very, very early in the morning, and I want to preserve that subtle and soft quality of light. Blacks, I'm going to bring down to about -20 or so. And again, I can hold on the Option key, and you see just when I start to clip my shadows here in the foreground, that's where I'll stop, about -20. And again, this is the basic panel, so we're making basic adjustments to get the image into the ballpark of where I want it, how I want it to look, and what I want to convey. Clarity, I'm going to bring up to about 20. Vibrance, I'm going to bring up to about, let's say, 15 or 20, together with saturation at about 5. And again, these are kind of some guidelines that I use. Saturation just helps to bring out some of the color that's in the image that's always lost when you capture in RAW, but not too much with the saturation. And then vibrance, I tend to use that a lot more because it's an intelligent saturation, as it were. Lightroom adds color to things that are undersaturated to begin with, and I find that it does a very nice job of adding color without making it look oversaturated or unnatural. Okay, so now I'm going to come down to the tone curve. And usually I like to add an S-curve here just to get some contrast and definition into the scene. You can either drag one out as I'm doing here, or you can start with one of the presets. In this case, the medium contrast preset works out pretty good. But you can see what happens here. When I add this tone curve, I get better definition, better tonality, more contrast, of course. But look what happened to my shadows. I lost a lot of the shadows here, which I don't want them to be that dark. That's not the feel that I want the image to have. So I'm going to come back up to the basic panel and boost the shadows about +30. And that just helps to add a little bit of light, as it were, into the shadow areas. And so to me, that feels a lot better. Now I'm going to jump down to the HSL controls, the next one down here. And the only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring down the blue channel of luminance. And the reason I do that is because when I'm shooting at these wide angles, I tend not to use a polarizer, because at 19mm, I just find that a polarizer does not polarize the sky evenly, and it'll make one area darker than the other. So here in the luminance channel, I can actually pull down the blues, and that gives me a better, a more even darkening of the sky. And really, I'm not so much darkening the sky as I'm really wanting to do is to give the clouds a little more presence, a little more depth. And you can see the difference that makes. I'm going to turn that off so you can have a better view here. So there you go. You see, it just makes my clouds look a little better. I didn't use any split toning, so I'm going to jump down to the detail panel here. And most important in the detail panel is to always either zoom in at 100%, or you can use a small little preview area here. But I like to zoom in at 100% because then you can see the effects of the sharpening here and also the noise reduction. If you're not zoomed in, it's really difficult to tell what the controls are doing. So I'm going to zoom in here to the foreground and maybe show a little bit of the far side of the mountain here. For the amount, I'm going to go up to about 50 or 60. I usually start with kind of that as a default and then adjust from there. Okay, this image was pretty sharp to begin with, so I don't need to use a lot. Radius is, of course, how fine of an edge Lightroom is going to look for to sharpen. And in this case, there's a lot of fine edges, this being a very detailed landscape. So a radius of 0.9 I find works pretty well. The lower the number, the finer the edge, the higher the number, the less of an edge it's going to search for. And so that's useful for things like portraits and images that perhaps have a lot of smooth areas and you only want to sharpen edges. But in this case, I have edges and I also have lots of texture. So I want that to be affected as well. The detail slider works in conjunction with the amount and the radius. It just determines how much of the sharpening based on the radius you're going to emphasize. And so again, in this case, I'm going to bring the detail up to about 75. You can see here what it's doing. It's basically just redefining or giving me more definition. If you hold down the Option key, you can see this as a grayscale. And so as I move this up to about 75 or 80, you can see it's just giving me more sharpness and definition in the foreground here. And also, if you look at the upper right-hand corner, how it's pulling out the detail in the far side of the river on the mountains there. And then finally, I'm going to hold down the Option key again and adjust the masking. And you can see how this allows me to mask off areas that I don't want to sharpen, but maintain the sharpening on areas that need to be sharpened. One thing I would do here is I would zoom back out again so that I can also see the sky. And you can see how it does a nice job, a very nice job on the fly of masking out the sky and some of the clouds in the river, but the rest of it maintains that sharpening. So very, very powerful control. Okay, and then for noise reduction, I'm just going to put these at about 10 and 10 for color, 10 for luminance and 10 for color. ISO 100, it's a pretty clean image to begin with, but this just helps to knock out any extra noise that might be there, and you can definitely see that on a print, especially a large print. So that's pretty much it for the detail here, a detail panel. In the lens correction, I always have this checked on. That's kind of it's kind of an automatic thing. It automatically searches for your camera and your lens and takes care of any deficiencies in that. So for instance, you can see how it corrects for perspective and also the light fall off in the edges. So, and I have this set as a preset. So whenever I import images into Lightroom, the lens correction gets added automatically. Don't have to think about it. And I highly recommend you do the same. Nothing in effects, didn't use any vignetting or anything like that. And in the camera calibration, I have it set to camera standard. Depending on your camera model, you're going to have different choices here. These are kind of like film stocks, you know. For example, ACR 4.4 gives me a different rendition of color than does, say, 3.3 or Adobe Standard. I find that the camera standard works well with this particular image, and for me in this camera it works well most of the time. So experiment with that again on your own. That's just giving you different ways of calibrating the color. And then finally I'm going to jump up to the local adjustments, and again we do these at the end. I do them at the end once I have the image more or less how I want it to look overall on a global scale. Then I can go in and fine-tune the image. And the only thing I'd like to do here is just darken my sky a bit, or really give the sky a little more definition. Compositionally, this image is about the foreground rocks leading very strongly into the river and the light hitting the far side here and then continuing up into the sky. And for me, it just doesn't make this transition here very well. The sky needs a little more definition to unify the whole image. So I'm going to do that by using a graduated filter. I have a pretty nice straight line here, and I'm going to drag out a pretty wide transition area here to make it very smooth and subtle. And then I'm going to apply an exposure of minus 0.3 or so, 0.30. Okay, and to that I'm also going to add about 20 of clarity. And all that does is it just gives my sky more depth, more definition, gives the clouds more richness, and you can see how that adds to the foreground, and I think makes the whole composition work a lot better. Other than that, I didn't really do anything else. I didn't add any dodging or burning brushes here. I just sort of like the way it felt and looks now, and that was pretty much it. And again, emphasizing again the whole idea of really trying to work on making the best capture that you can, because I think that makes what you're trying to convey and interpret with the image a lot easier and a lot more effective. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that and you benefit from that and get some ideas and inspiration for your own work. Feel free to leave any comments or questions below. I'm always happy to hear from you, and always happy to answer back and help out in any way I can. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.